Chapter 2. Welcome Home. Are you sure this is the right place? Gagara asked, her voice sounding more than a little sceptical. She had landed on the branch of a tree behind him at first, but then she had hopped down to the ground next to where Reyes was standing. Reyes looked at his girlfriend and gave her a reassuring smile, but to be frank, he wasn't sure. This part of the forest looked much the same as virtually any other part of the forest. There were no real landmarks visible from the air, nothing to indicate that there was any kind of encampment nearby. Even when he landed, Reyes couldn't be absolutely certain he was in the right place. Admittedly, the trees in this part of the forest looked familiar, but that might be nothing more than wishful thinking. He felt as if he'd been flying almost non-stop for a number of days now, and he needed a rest. I think so, Reyes replied. He looked at the two trees in front of him and hoped he was right. The last time he had entered the encampment, he had done so draped unceremoniously over someone's shoulder. What he had seen of the world had been upside down, and he had only been able to see the part of the forest that the man carrying him had already passed. His first view of the two trees had been as a pair of fancy pillars from inside the encampment. While it was true that he had taken a little bit of time to try and remember what the trees had looked like from this side, when he had left on his current errand, the image hadn't burned itself into his memory in quite the way he had hoped. Reyes glanced quickly round at the rest of the village. Many of them had taken perches in the top of the nearby trees. Others had set about felling trees with which they would make shelters and feed the cooking fires. Even if this wasn't the right place, it was getting late and they needed to stop for the night. It felt good to look over his shoulder and see his huntresses hard at work at their self-appointed tasks. Every one of them seemed to know exactly what was needed and had gotten to work on those projects immediately. Neither he nor Gagara had to give him even so much as a single word of command. Throughout the flight from the outskirts of Bolton City, one harpy in particular, Gwenagov, had stayed almost as close to Reyes as Gagara had. Even now she was standing next to him, her spear held at a relatively neutral angle while she eyed the surrounding trees with suspicion. Reyes rested her hand lightly on Gwenagov's shoulder. Gwenagov was so wound up with expectation she actually jumped. "Calm down, dear," Reyes tried to assure her. "There's nothing to fear here." "I can sense humanity, my chief," Gwenagov replied. "I can almost smell them. There are humans nearby, watching us." "That's good," Reyes commented. It meant they were probably in the right place, although he couldn't help but wonder if she might be imagining it. While it was true that a good huntress could smell her prey, the great dome that Mangloss had erected over the human encampment kept out all sight and sound. Reyes would be very surprised if Mangloss had forgotten to filter out scent as well. Indeed, had Mangloss forgotten something so fundamental, wouldn't there now be the overwhelming smell of many a meal being prepared wafting through the forest? "If you say so, my chief," Gwenagov replied uncertainly. She lowered her spear slightly to make it a touch more threatening to anyone who might be watching. Reyes looked about himself. With Gagara by his side, it was hard to think that anything was amiss with the world, but someone certainly seemed to be missing. "Where is Nida?" "Who, my chief?" Gwenagov kept her eyes on the empty forest as she spoke. Her eyes seemed to be looking in all directions at once. "Nida," Reyes replied. He felt a little confused. "She was my bodyguard." "I'm your bodyguard, my chief," Gwenagov replied calmly. There was no confusion in her voice that suggested she didn't know who Nida was, just a blunt refusal to acknowledge that there even was a Nida. "Aren't I supposed to have two?" Reyes asked. "Your second bodyguard hasn't been selected yet, my chief. For now, it's just me," Gwenagov answered. "And Nida?" Reyes commented. "I don't know any Nida," Gwenagov told him calmly. "I don't think I've ever known anyone called Nida." Reyes felt quite helpless for a moment, and then he felt a hand resting lightly on his side. Gagara was trying to get his attention. He turned to face her, asking, "Am I going mad? You remember Nida, don't you?" Gagara shook her head slowly. Then she spoke softly, as if scared to raise her voice. "There is not now, and never has been, a girl by the name of Nida in this village. We remember her, but she never existed. None of those who left our village during our long flight will ever have existed. It is the way things are. It is the way things have always been." "They left us," Reyes replied, concerned. "They did," Gagara confirmed, keeping her voice low as if she feared Gwenagov would take umbrage at her comments. "They make some excuse. Perhaps they claim to need a rest, although it's more common for a huntress to make the excuse that she needs to relieve herself. Then they just don't return." "And then no one would even admit that they were ever a member of our village?" Reyes asked. "Quite," Gagara replied warily. I don't suppose she said why she was leaving, Reyes asked. Gagara laughed, yet still she refused to speak up. If we suspected for 1 second that she was leaving, she wouldn't have gotten more than a few feet before someone still loyal to you brought her down. No one ever tells another why they're leaving a village unless they were hoping to take that someone with them. I wish I knew her reasons, Reyes commented. She wanted a child, my chief, Quinnigoff said coldly. She looked sharply at Gagara and then at Reyes. It seemed to bother her that she was finally admitting that Anida had even existed. She breathed heavily for a moment. She told me more than once that she was looking forward to being a mother. 8 years was too long to wait. I see. Reyes actually felt a little meek as he replied. Quinnigoff's eyes seemed to bore right into him. When you come in out of the blue and make so many changes in such a short time, Quinnigoff almost seemed to be growling as she spoke. I'm surprised you have any village left, my chief. You let down a lot of girls with your declarations. There would have been a fair number of girls in the village, girls of a certain age, who were both childless but still hopeful that one day they would be sent to the male. If you reach 16 or so without a child, then your chances of having a child aren't high. But there is always hope. When a new male comes in and effectively tells them they will never have a child if they stay, there isn't a lot of incentive for them to hang about. I see, Reyes repeated sadly, nodding. He would still have stood by his decision. He was not going to be unfaithful for the girl he loved. But now he understood how his stance on fidelity had upset the entire village. With some, it might be something else, Quinnigoff said. She seemed more willing to talk when it wasn't about any huntress in particular. It was a big shock to many that you were planning on changing sides in the war, my chief. For one thing, most of us are pretty certain that the elves have already won. Add that to how humanity has treated our race in the past, and it all adds up to several good reasons to leave the village. At least you didn't leave me, Reyes said to Quinnigoff. This is my post, my chief. I couldn't desert it. No bodyguard would ever leave her post. Really? Reyes replied. So they were back to even refusing to acknowledge that Nida had ever existed. How many girls have we lost? Quinnigoff didn't really reply. She looked at him, then back to the trees. Lost, my chief? Gagara giggled. Do you know my love? Reyes asked of Gagara. Not a clue, Gagara replied. You don't sound all that bothered by it, Reyes suggested. I'm not, Gagara said. We may have lost a few decent huntresses along the way, but a long flight across the country is a good way to shake off all the chaff. There are usually good reasons why those girls never get sent to the male, and quite frankly, we're probably better off without them. Reyes felt a little shocked by Gagara's attitude. Once again he had to remind himself that harpies thought differently than the way he had been brought up to think. With his attention still on Gagara, something suddenly occurred to him. I was bringing them here. They know roughly where we were going. Gagara smiled and patted him reassuringly on the shoulder. You don't need to worry. Few would be able to find this place from the tiny amount of description you gave us before leaving, and none of those who were leaving were likely to have hung around to see where we were going. The most they'll report is that one village has gone rogue. Quinnigoff immediately became very protective as someone appeared out of thin air right in front of them. It was Anida. She had appeared in front of the two gnarly trees wearing her knightly armour, her helmet tucked under her arm, her sword still sheathed by her side. She was in mid-stride as she appeared, though she came to a halt a half-step later. There was a nervous, uncertain look about her features. Quinnigoff moved quickly, stepping between her mail and the armoured figure, while at the same time levelling her spear towards what she perceived as a new threat. Reyes knew what would happen if it came to confrontation. Quinnigoff might appear to have the upper hand, and she might have the strength of a harpy. She might even be one of the best huntresses the village had to offer. On the other hand, Anida was Sir Grant's daughter, and she was better than the average knight with a sword. If it should come to blows, Reyes had little doubt Quinnigoff would be dead before she even realised she was in a fight. Reyes stepped to Quinnigoff's side. He grabbed hold of her spear and forced her to bring it back to a more neutral position. It's all right. She's a friend. Quinnigoff lowered her spear dutifully, but she kept her eyes on Anida at all times. She seemed quite jumpy. It wouldn't take much to set her off again. Reyes felt certain he had to show his bodyguard just how much he trusted this human. Anida, he said, stepping forward in front of Quinnigoff and extending his arms in welcome. Reyes, Anida replied, still sounding uncertain. She looked at Quinnigoff and then at Gagara. Then her eyes partially drifted over the scene of the harpies perched in the high branches of the surrounding trees, while at the same time keeping a careful check on the three standing before her. Who else? Reyes asked as he took another step closer. If you weren't sure it was me, why did you show yourself? Anida brought her attention back to Reyes. Then she eyed the huntress with the spear again. But finally she seemed to decide it was safe to meet Reyes halfway. They embraced. It wasn't all that comfortable of an embrace for Reyes. He felt himself shiver as his naked body touched Anida's metal armour, but hopefully such a gesture would prove to harpy and human alike that the two of them were firm friends. I wasn't sure, Anida admitted, breaking away from the clinch, but there are a lot of soldiers watching us from just inside the encampment, looking for any excuse to charge out and cut you down where you stand. Well, you can relax, Reyes told her happily. It is I. We're back. He turned and announced himself to those soldiers hidden beyond the gnarly-looking trees. You can relax. It is I. Anida laughed. I'm not sure that'll mean a lot to most of them. It'll probably mean more to them that you and I appear to be friends. Reyes nodded. I see you brought a few friends back with you, Anida voiced. Are they safe? As safe as I am with you, Reyes told her. They are my village. I didn't really want to take the village, but it seemed the easiest way to garner the release of my sister and her husband. Are they on the right side? Anida asked worriedly. They are on my side, Reyes replied cryptically. Few of them have any love for either elf or human, but they will help to kick out the elves if and when I tell them to do so. So long as my beloved brother doesn't give an order placing them in the front line of battle, but instead plays to their strengths, then I think you can rely on having air support in future. I'm sure Greyfall will love that, Anida commented, a little calmer now. There was even a slight trace of a laugh in her voice. I'm sure he will, Reyes agreed. Speaking of which, I need to see him. Can you lead us to him? I feel it would be best if we have an escort for now. Greyfall isn't here, Anida commented. He left yesterday morning with 500 men and a few knights on some campaign. Not to castle them off, Reyes said worriedly. He had warned against the rash action of taking back the castle from the elves. Its proximity to the elven city of Goldspawn meant it was almost certainly a part of the elven supply route. I don't know, Anida admitted. I wasn't party to the information. Then I need to speak to Sir Richmond, Mangloss, or to your father, Reyes told her. My father left with Greyfall, Anida said with a hint of worry in her voice. Mangloss is almost certainly hard at work enchanting one of the totems, and Sir Richmond hasn't been seen since shortly after you left. I think your brother sent him off on some mission, but I don't know where. Sir Richmond gone? Reyes said, shocked. What does that mean? Does that put you in charge? In that case, I need to speak to you. Anida laughed. I wish that were the case. Even if I was in charge, I doubt anyone would listen to me. No. There's Mangloss, and there's... She hesitated. Reyes pressed. Just Mangloss, Anida said. Clearly she was holding something back. Then I guess it will have to be Mangloss, Reyes commented. Take me to him. Anida nodded, but she hesitated to move. She glanced over her shoulder at the magical barrier. Reyes felt as if she were looking past the barrier at the soldiers standing on the other side. Then she looked back at him, her face full of doubt. I fear you might have woken up the entire encampment with your arrival. You think so? Reyes asked. A flock that size is hard to miss, Anida explained. She sounded hesitant as she added, You still have that sentence of death hanging over your head. If I'm with you, I can probably stop any of the men from carrying out the sentence, but I have no control over Sir Duncan and Sir Fawkes, and by now I expect they'll both be just inside the encampment, waiting for you to enter. I remember when you were last here, Sir Duncan was livid that he had missed the opportunity to kill you. He won't be happy at missing another such chance. If Reyes is hurt, we attack, Gagara warned coldly. What? Krennikov asked. She took a firm grip of her spear and held it threateningly towards Anida. Stay calm, please, Reyes insisted. He grabbed Krennikov's spear and forced her, again, to move it back to a more neutral position. Then he returned his attention to Anida. So what do you suggest? Well, Anida said, you told me that you only took the village in order to rescue your sister. I assume Jenny is with you somewhere. As a princess of the country, she might have enough leverage to... She hesitated. She's not a princess yet, is she? I mean, you stopped the marriage. She's not a princess, Reyes admitted. She's a queen. Under Flourish law, even a queen cannot countermand the orders of a king. That's true, Anida said sadly, her head dipped to the ground. A king, on the other hand, can, Reyes revealed. The king is with you, Anida said hopefully. We saw the pictures in the sky. Mangloss said they were probably faked, but King Goatee lives, Reyes told her. Goatee? Anida said, and then she nodded. King Goatee, of course. Reyes looked about his immediate surroundings. I was hoping to wait until we were safely inside the barrier before I exposed them to any potential danger, but I guess we're safe enough here. He looked at Quinagoff and Gagara, telling them, "Keep a careful eye on things. Let no one but us four approach the painting until I return." "I'm coming with you, my chief," Quinagoff demanded. "I want you to stay here," Reyes insisted. "I won't be long." "But my chief," Quinagoff protested. Reyes ignored her for a moment. From his hammerstone ring he brought forth the painting of the little cottage that Mangloss had given him just before he had left on his errand. He turned round and hung the picture gently on the bough of a nearby tree. "Very nice," Anida commented. "It looks familiar. I think I've seen that painting before somewhere." "Mangloss's hut, probably," Reyes replied. "He gave it to me when Gagara and I left." "Very nice," Anida repeated. "I assume it's magical." Reyes smiled and nodded. He had to remind himself that only those trained in magic could see the telltale glow that was generated by magical objects. "Very." "I would ask what it does," Anida commented, "but I have a feeling that you're about to show me." "Quite," Reyes agreed. He looked over his shoulder at Quinagoff. "Now, I don't want you to panic. I'm going to disappear into the painting for a couple of minutes. I won't be in any danger, and I don't need you along to hold my hand. Don't do anything out here that I'll regret." "I should come along with you, my chief," Quinagoff said. Though to be fair, she didn't sound too keen. "No need," Reyes reiterated. "I won't be long. And when I return, I won't be alone. I don't want you attacking anyone you see emerging from the painting just because they are not me." Quinagoff seemed a little uncertain. Clearly she didn't like the idea of letting Reyes out of her sight even for a few seconds. But then again, he was her chief, and as far as she was concerned, his word was law. Reyes turned back to the painting. He checked that it was firmly supported by the tree, and then he placed the palm of his hand flat against the canvas. There was no need to focus on any actual smell. It was a magical item, and as such could be used by anyone with or without magical aptitude, so long as they knew the correct words to trigger the desired effect. A moment later, Reyes was standing in a field of overripe corn that was swaying gently in the soft breeze. There was no sign of snow here, just a nice hot sun, an illusion of the real thing, keeping the cottage standing before him in perpetual daylight. Almost the instant he appeared in the field, a figure emerged from the cottage. It was his sister, Jenny. She was followed by her husband, King Goti, and by Princess Alice. Jenny approached Reyes quickly. She climbed over the white picket fence that separated the cottage from the cornfield and waded through the corn toward him. "Have we arrived? Are we there?" "We have," Reyes told her. "It's about time," King Goti commented gruffly. He followed Jenny virtually on her tail. Alice hung back a little, but she wasn't all that far behind the other two. "There's no sense of time here, but it feels as if it's been days." "It's the evening of the day after Gagara and I took over the village," Reyes told the king. "It's still the same day as you entered the painting. It's cold out in the real world, so be ready for a sudden drop in temperature as you leave the painting." "Traitor!" Princess Alice yelled at them, climbing over the picket fence. Then she strode up to Reyes. "My brother I can understand. He's human and stupid. He doesn't realise yet what a boon it is not to have to worry about the future. But you—" She prodded Reyes in the chest. "You are supposed to be totally loyal to our elven masters. You are a traitor. You will be executed in the middle of First Ten as an example to others the first chance we get." Reyes grabbed Alice's hand and held it to stop her from prodding him. "Let go of me, you rotten insect," Alice yelled. "That's enough," King Goti insisted of Alice. He looked sharply at her. "I'm sorry, Reyes. She's been like that ever since the harpies captured us. All she had to eat at the feast was a sausage. I hope Mangloss can find us a cure." "A cure for what?" Alice replied, yelling. "For the first time in my life I could see everything clearly. Just because my beliefs no longer coincide with yours, you think I'm sick." "Well, I'm sorry, brother, but that's a really weak argument." "We should leave the painting," Reyes commented. He took a step back from Alice. "Good idea," King Goti replied. "Yes, scum," Alice growled. "Get away from me. I'll stay here. You can come back if and when you see the light and are willing to apologise." "Although I hate to do it," King Goti suggested, "it might be best if we just leave her in here for the time being."